Hello, my name is Tim Shoebridge. Welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be looking at something just a little bit different. It's not hardware this time, it's going to be software. In fact, it's going to be a sample library. That sample library is called Resonate, and it's the latest release from Spitfire Audio. Now, full disclosure on this one, Spitfire Audio did get in contact with me and asked me if I'd like to take a look at the software. So the software that I'm running here is a review copy. I didn't buy it with my own money. That said, I don't owe them anything. I have bought many of their products over the years, always with my own money. I'm going to tell you what I think about this particular sample library, the good things, the bad things. I'm going to be as honest as I can. It's not going to be a full review, a walkthrough, because Spitfire Audio are very, very good at doing walkthroughs of their own products. So I'm going to be picking out a few things about Resonate and fundamentally trying to answer the question, who is this sample library for? That's what's coming up. I hope it's of interest to you. As always, thank you very, very much for watching. Okay, so what is Resonate? Well, it's a percussive sample library, a percussion sample library. I'd kind of really call it a percussive effects sample library personally. I'm going to let Spitfire Audio's website and accompanying walkthrough video really explain the library in detail, because it's full of very, very useful information. I'll leave a link to this web page so that you can see it. It's a library that has been recorded in collaboration with a lady by the name of Dame Evelyn Glennie. She's a virtuoso, a percussionist, a highly renowned, award-winning lady, and she's very experimental in the kinds of percussive sounds that she creates. And you can see her here in this photograph. She's striking a cymbal of some kind and holding it very, very close to this large timpani drum here. And that's kind of the essence of the library. The library is about having one instrument which you strike or stroke or scrape or whatever, which is generating a sound, but you hold it in very, very close vicinity or contact with a larger vessel, such as the timpani drum or a metal barrel or other things like that. And that will create these resonant aftershocks. And that's what this library is all about. Okay, so let's listen to some of the sounds in this sample library. I'm not going to go through them all. It's not going to be a walkthrough, but I'll pick out a few and try and give you my impressions. So let's pop my headphones on. So for me, there's three sort of like categories of sound really here. There are some traditional percussive sounds of drums and cymbals and that kind of thing. But then we get on to these sort of like really weird, out there kind of effects. They kind of remind me of something, I don't know, apocalypse meets industrial meets sci-fi meets horror movie. There's some really weird and wonderful sounds going on in here. And then there are some more sort of gentle tonal sounds that you can actually sort of play across a keyboard. We'll come on to, I'll pick out a few examples of each of those categories, but they're my own made-up categories. They're not categories that you have with the library itself. Let's start off with some sort of more traditional sounds. So these are There's 3 samples here which are of a snare drum. And obviously with the mod wheel here I'm using expression. Here we've got some really deep booms. It's all about the resonance, isn't it? And here with hits we have some deep booms, but they're kind of, I don't know how to describe them. They're really great sounds, aren't they? But they are, you know, they're not caked in resonance, but they're very, very resonant. And we'll get on to the different options we have for changing the sound in a little while. Okay, so that's the kind of more traditional sounds. But then when I talk about this sort of apocalyptic horror movie, sci-fi, industrial kind of grunge, let's listen to some of those. So here is the first one. When I first heard these, I had visions of a drunk trombonist down London Underground late at night. I don't know why. And then those same sounds are then recorded, well, they call them longs here, but I think they're kind of looped because they just seem to go on for forever. And there's a few different examples of these. Very weird, isn't it? Very, very weird. Okay, let's find a few other examples. The thing with the user interface that I find a little bit difficult is trying to find sounds based on the descriptions, because the descriptions really don't help you sort of narrow down what those sounds are. So we have these sort of categories: barrel, timpani, water tank, and thunder sheet, and these are the sort of like the larger resonating bodies that the other instruments are in close contact with. And then you have these subcategories in here. So, but they really don't sort of describe what the sound is. So barrel and then wooden, you'd kind of expect sort of like wooden block kind of sounds. But then you find that we have something really quite different. So here we have just one sample, but we've got 5 round robins, so there's been 5 attempts at recording it. So if I hold down the C, I'll get the round robins, or I can just play the samples individually if I want some repeatability, which is what I'll do. I'll just run through the 5 here. And these sound like this. So remember, this is the wooden category. Wow, it's like gunfire. That's just not what I would expect. Let's try the other ones here. And lastly, So they're incredible sounds, but they're quite, they're not quite what I would expect by looking at these names here. And so, it really, you need to invest the time in going into each of these subcategories and finding out and getting used to where to find the sounds that you want. But there's a lot you can do with the sounds. I mean, all the sounds that we've just been hearing there are just the default mix, and there's some reverb that's been applied. That's what you get by default. You can change the sounds quite a lot. So if we go back to, let's go back to those snare drum sounds. First thing we can do is go in and look at the mic positions. Well, this is normally where you would have mic positions in a traditional Spitfire audio sample library, and we do have mic positions here. We've got a couple of mixes. We're listening to mix number 1 at the moment, and we do have some mic positions. So I'm just going to go with the close mics. So this is going to be as dry as we get with this particular sound. But while that's loading, we've got a bunch of different mic positions here. We've got the Decatree, ambient. We've got contact mics. We've got mics that are boundary mics that are placed above and below. And then we've got a bunch of different effects. Microphones placed underwater, and then we've got some digital reverbs and other digital effects treatments, as well as analog treatments. And they're all basically effects that you can apply to the sound and mix in how you want to. So you have an awful lot of variation, but this is just the close mics on their own of these snares, and this is what it sounds like. So this is as dry as it gets. It's pretty dry. In fact, there is actually some reverb here. Let me get rid of that reverb. So you can get away from that sort of like that boomy resonant sound if you want to. If we go and choose these really deep hits that we had before, but just listen to them on the close mic. Obviously they're very resonant, but that's because the instrument itself, when it's been struck, is resonant. Let's go back to the hits category. So the snares are quite dry, but the other sounds are not. And that's kind of, for me, it does limit to a degree how much you can use these more general purpose percussive sounds in drum loops and drum tracks and that kind of thing. Let's just play around with some of these weirder and more wonderful effects. So this is Wave, I think it's a digital reverb. Let's go back to snare, something that we are more familiar with. And let's try a few other. This is a granular synthesis applied to the sound, but as an effect. These are normally quite nice. These are microphones underwater. And let's just try a couple more. These last two, vintage. This is some sort of like selection of vintage analog gear, I think. This one. And as well as these different mic positions and treatments with digital and analog outboard gear, we've got also effects themselves. So we can apply a regular reverb like we normally can with any of these Spitfire audio sample libraries. We've got reverb. We can add compression, which is very useful with percussive sounds, and we've actually got a high pass filter and a separate low pass filter. Some of the sounds, not all of them, but some of them you can actually stretch them without affecting the pitch, which is really useful, but it's not there for all of the sounds. And also with some of the sounds you can affect the release at the end. We can't with this particular one. So there are plenty of ways of playing around and changing the sound quite dramatically, actually. So it really is a library where you need to explore these different categories and subcategories, explore the different mic positions and treatments, and explore all the effects as well. So there's an awful lot there, although on the face of it, when you look at it, there doesn't seem to be that much here in terms of individual samples or instruments. Actually, when you get down to all the different permutations, there is an awful lot. Right, so while we're on the subject of the user interface and while we're looking at it in a little bit of detail, there's one thing I do need to mention, and that there are two different modes that you can be in when you're using the user interface. What we've been seeing so far is called standard mode. You'll see at the top here, mode standard, but there's also a second mode and it's called grid. So let's just take a little look at the grid. I think, one of the limitations with standard mode is that when you drill down to an instrument and you start to set up some mic positions and add some treatments and effects, is you're dealing with a very small number of samples at any point in time, a sound basically. And so if you want to use multiple sounds from this sample library and build up a kit, then you're ending up having to create lots of instances of the sample library in your DAW. So this grid mode kind of gets around that. We have a way of mapping samples across a small section of the keyboard, as you can see here. And you have got complete control over this. You can decide what samples play across what keys. But when I say samples, we have a kind of different way of looking at them over here. And this is slightly confusing for me because this way of looking at those samples doesn't sort of tie back to the standard way. We've got thunder, so we've got B and A. We come down here a little bit further on. We've got bowed A and B. Super Bowl is a section, which is fine, and so is water tank, which is a section, which is what we had before. But then we don't have any sort of like clue as to what these are. They're just sort of like numbered. We get down here a bit further on. We've got low hits, barrel hits, that kind of thing. So it's a different way of slicing and dicing those samples, but you're going to have to sort of like through trial and error figure out what number 9, row number 9 actually is in terms of sounds. And what I found is that as you if you think you're going to listen to the same thing all the way across here, you're not. You're actually listening to different samples at different positions along here. It takes a lot of getting used to. I think maybe the idea is that you're not supposed to sort of like go into that level of detail with it. You're supposed to just go with the flow. There's a whole bunch of sort of like settings that you can choose from over here. Randomize within the bowed section A, bowed section B, etc. Low hits, high hits, whatever. So you basically pick one of these guys, and of course you can, as I said before, you can override them. But the idea, I think, is that you're supposed to sort of like semi-randomly choose kits that have got a sort of like similarities in terms of their tonal qualities, and then play them across the keyboard that way. So clearly this sample library is I think it's fair to say, is a specialist sample library. It's not a mainstream sample library. It's not a a percussion library with loops in it and standard kits and the kind of stuff that you're going to build drum loops with. It's got a specific purpose in mind. Now, obviously, we're not all film composers that are about to score a dystopian, apocalyptic horror movie, sci-fi, industrial thing. But if you are into that kind of composition or theatre production or whatever it might be, or game development, then this is going to be a treasure trove of sounds for you. It's not going to be for everyday use, but it's going to be one of those tools in your toolkit. And once in a while you're going to come to it and go, wow, that is the perfect sound for what I want. But for the rest of us, does this have a place in your toolkit of sample libraries that you might have? And that's kind of something that I've been thinking about quite a lot since I started to play around with this sample library. Is it really for me? What can I put it to good use for? So that's what I'm going to cover in this next section, because really there are there's three sort of main ways that I've ended up using this sample library, and I'll cover each of those in turn. This is just my thoughts and just my experiences with this sample library, but maybe they'll be of help to you. So that's what's coming up, the three ways that I've been using Resonate by Spitfire Audio. Okay, so the first way that I've ended up using Resonate is to reinforce an existing drum loop that I've got going on, because there's some really nice sounds in Resonate which aren't traditional sounds, but they still can very readily be mixed with traditional sounds to create sort of like a bigger kit, if you'd like, to reinforce what's going on. So here I've got an example. I'll show you on the screen here. This is in Cubase. I've just soloed these 4 tracks towards the top of this project. The first 2 tracks you can see here in bright green, lime green if you like. These are both Resonate sample library tracks, and then the ones below it are with probably my most favorite go-to percussion library, which is called Stylus RMX, and it's by Spectrasonics. It's got lots of very, very cool drum loops in it. You can play all of the sounds individually and make up kits yourself, but it's got lots of really good ready-to-use drum loops for different genres of music, modern music, I have to say. So let's just hear what's going on here, because I'm basically using some of the samples from Resonate and then basically applying them with my more traditional sounds. So I'll just press play now. What you'll hear at the beginning is just the Resonate samples themselves, and then this traditional sample library, percussion library, Stylus RMX will kick in, and you'll get the vibe that's going on here. It sounds like this. So this is Resonate. I've got quite an upbeat little percussive loop going on. And then that Stylus RMX kicking in. So those cymbal hits from Resonate give that kind of grungy, urban kind of vibe to the track, and I think it works really well in combination with more traditional drum loops. And I'm using this actually quite a lot to reinforce traditional drum sounds with the slightly edgy Resonate sounds that are available. Right, so the second way I've been using Resonate is as an inspiration machine, an ideas machine, basically. And, we all need to try new things to get some inspiration, to find ideas. Otherwise, we kind of get stayed in the same way of doing things, the same way of approaching creating music. And I don't think I'm alone in saying that, but that's my impression anyway. And I'm going to sort of draw a weird comparison between Resonate and a piece of hardware in a second. But what I'm trying to say with Resonate is, it's not a standard general purpose percussion library. It doesn't have a wide range of general purpose samples in it. It's quite niche, quite specific. So you can't really use it for a lot of mainstream drum loops, but it's got some really interesting sounds in it. And so what I've been using it for is to actually come up with some ideas using its limited palette of mainstream drum sounds. And then from those ideas will come other ideas. And I'm going to show you here is a little track I put together where I start off with a quite a sort of an ambient, slow, resonate kind of drum loop going on, and it turns into something completely different. And I was trying, I was getting this kind of inspiration in terms of drum loops and rhythms from a piece of hardware. I'm talking about the Moog Subharmonicon. Now, that little piece of gear to me was an incredible ideas machine. It in itself has got quite a limited palette of sounds that it can create. Its sequences are only 4-note sequences, but it's great for coming up with ideas, and to me that's what Resonate is like as well. It's limited, but it's great for coming up with ideas which I then can sort of like take off in completely different directions. So let me just show you what I'm talking about, or give you an example of what I'm talking about here. So you'll see here I've soloed the first few tracks in this particular project here, and again we're looking at some Resonate tracks, the top 3, and then I'm bringing in Stylus RMX, which is my sort of like go-to drum loop library. I'm taking this all out of context of the music that I've got going on here. I'll put the music back in so you can hear actually what the thing is all about. But I started off with an idea here which sounds like this. And then I kind of pick it up a bit and I adapt it and I transform it and I change it into something else. Which has had the effect of actually making it a little bit faster. And then based on that very limited little drum loop that I've got going on with Resonate, I decide to sort of take it in a completely different direction with a different sample library. And it's, I'm not giving you the full picture here by just playing the drum tracks on their own. So I'm going to just actually take it right back to the beginning and play it from start. So you can just hear how I've gone from one completely different sort of slow-paced mood into something completely different altogether again. And I like doing that. For me, although the track goes on actually, and there's not a lot of Resonate in it from that point onwards, I wouldn't have come up with this track if I hadn't started somewhere. And I started with Resonate and a very small number of samples and put something together. And so Resonate is a very small portion of this track. It's just at the start and at the very, very end. But the track wouldn't exist if I hadn't started somewhere, and Resonate is where I started. So for me, it's an inspiration machine. Okay, so the third way I've been using Resonate, and this is where I've had the most fun, I have to say, and I was almost going to call it cheating, but it's not cheating because it's a sample library. You can do whatever you like with it. But basically, what I've been doing is taking some of the more weird and wonderful sounds in this sample library and doing a little bit of granular synthesis on them, looping them, spreading them chromatically across my keyboard. Because there are very, very few samples that you can play tonally, chromatically on the keyboard inside the library. I think that's a little bit of a missed opportunity. So I've been just playing around with a few. Let me put my headphones on so I can hear what I'm doing. So if we take this little sample here as an example, it's Maelstrom. It sounds like this. The sound of someone pushing back on their metal chair in an aircraft hangar, isn't it? Anyway, I took those two samples, and the way I like to manipulate samples is to use a Waldorf Iridium, which I've got here. There is a million different pieces of hardware that you can manipulate samples with these days, and software as well. I'm just using Iridium. It's my sort of like tool of choice for this kind of thing. So I'm going to just play you a patch that just uses that very first sample that I played there. But I've just spread it across the keyboard chromatically, and I've just toned it down a little bit so it's just a little bit more subtle. And let me give you just a couple more examples. Here's the next one where I've got a loop going on. And this one, I've got some granular synthesis. I'm using the granular synthesis particle engine for this. I mean, for me, I just love those sounds, and they have an awful lot more uses than the raw sounds that you get inside the sample library. I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity that Spitfire didn't look at some of these sounds and provide some looped examples of them, because they really are very, very useful. Now, obviously, if you are happy and confident to take those samples and then further manipulate them yourself, then obviously that means that you could take any sounds and manipulate them yourself. It doesn't have to be these specific Resonate samples, it can be anything. And of course, what Resonate has got there is an awful lot of resonation, a lot of reverberation, etc. And you can obviously add that in yourself as well. So I think if you are the kind of musician who is comfortable creating your own, you know, manipulations of sounds, then the need for this library is maybe a little bit less, because let's face it, it's a short step from looping and granular synthesis to actually getting out a little field recorder, like a little Zoom H5 or whatever it is, and going around and capturing your own sounds yourself. I mean, it's a huge amount of fun to be able to do that. and then see what results you can get. So obviously the Spitfire Audio Resonate library is beautifully and professionally recorded and played. But when you start to sort of like really break down sounds into little grains and little loops, then you can get a lot of mileage out of just, you know, the pots and pans in your kitchen, for example. So for me, I've had the most fun taking these samples and turning them into things, into actual instruments that I can play on my keyboard. That's been the most fun to me of all. But as I say, you know, you don't have to stop there with Resonate. You can use any sounds that you can come across to do that and record your own. Okay, so I think it's time in the video to come up with some final thoughts about Resonate. I mean, I've showed you a few ways that I am using the library, and they're probably not the ways that it was originally intended for. But then I don't have any apocalyptic, sci-fi, industrial, end-of-day kind of film scores to complete. You know, obviously, if you are drawn to this library because of those specific sounds, then you know who you are. For me, it was a question of, well, how could I use this library basically? And I found that it's a really, really creative tool. It's getting me into places, creating drum rhythms that I wouldn't otherwise come up with, and those then lead on to other ideas, and that's all good for me. At the end of the day, I might not end up coming up with something that's a really showcasing Resonant, but it's good enough for me because it's getting me to come up with music and come up with compositions, and that's the most important thing. You know, price-wise, it is a premium library. It's on special offer at the moment, but it will be going up to, I think it's just under £200 in the UK. That is quite a lot of money for a library that is very, very niche. You know, I think today we're just so spoilt for choice. There are so many, you know, samples out there, sample libraries, software synths and software plugins for sampling, and there's so many really, really reasonably priced pieces of hardware these days that also do samples and sample manipulation as well. We've just got so much choice, so where this library might fit in for you is entirely a personal choice. That's all I've got time for in this particular video. Until the next opportunity that I have to talk to you, as always, thank you very, very much for watching.